Thank you for staying with us. It's the Eid edition of the AM show, and we're glad to be here with you. Wherever you're watching us, tell a friend to tell a friend. It's going down here on the AM show. Time now for the news review. It's a scanty morning by way of the newspapers, as you would expect, because it's a holiday. So even the papers that have come out are on a bit of a diet. Yeah, the papers are dieting, as you can see. But we have a lot of content that we're going to be discussing with you on on our social media platforms as well. As and when we're joined by Suleimana Brima, who is our guest. Okay, so I'm told Suleimana is here with us. Happy Eid holiday to you, Eid al-Adha, Suleimana Brima. Can you hear me, Sule? Can you hear me, Sule?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, I can. I was just saying happy holiday to you, and thank you for joining the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, and happy holiday to each and everyone, and wishing all of us the very best.
Great. I love the fact that you're in white this morning. But let's start talking about the Eid and related matters. How have you found the celebration of the Eid this year? Okay, so we have a bit of a temporary glitch with...
The normal, there was consensus on...
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
I think the connection this morning is terrible. And I was making the point that it's a normal festive occasion. Fortunately, this year there was consensus within the Muslim fraternity on when we should have the Eid celebration, which was on Saturday. And it was marked peacefully. I listened to the president's speech on the occasion, and fortunately all went well. So I guess we all prayed for our country. We know we are in crisis economically, socially, and all of that. And so we just wish ourselves well and wish our country well.
Very good point. But I also wanted to quickly, have you give us your thoughts on the Hajj, because tied to the Eid is the Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, crucial to the life of every Muslim. And it appears every year there are issues. This year we heard of issues of people's passports supposedly disappearing and favoritism here and there, and a whole host of matters. It's about the highest bidder getting this or that. That casts a bit of a slur on the entire process. Here we are in another year, and we're witnessing same. How do we sanitize the Hajj issue?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of work to be done in terms of the coordination, in terms of the arrangements and all of that. This year's, as far as my information is concerned, was a peculiar situation because you had people who had paid for Hajj in 2019 and for reasons of COVID could not make it.
Right.
And so this presented the first opportunity post-COVID for them to embark on the pilgrimage. And I'm told there were about 2,000 people who had paid. Then again, because of COVID, the Saudi authorities had also cut down the number of allocations for each country. And I'm told that in Ghana, it was about 3,000 or 3,050 or so.
Right.
And so what it means is that you had a backlog of 2,000, and then you also had a cut. Because previously, I think we were doing around 6,000 thereabouts. So that's about half of what we used to do. But given that we knew that this could be the situation, the Hajj managers, the board, ought to have perhaps made some very proactive arrangements to ensure that at least those who had paid, the 2,000 that paid in 2019, would have been secured their travel. And then given that you have fewer numbers to deal with, then you could have planned in such a way that you don't give a lot of people assurances and a lot of people having hope. And then also ending up collecting a lot of money from people and disappointing them. So again, it's quite a disappointment, but I hope that they improve as they go along.
Well, interesting perspectives there. I think it's only fitting now that we jump into the papers now. And I'll start with the Daily Graphic newspaper. Restore services, President appeals to teachers. I'm sure you followed the back and forth between the teachers asking for COLA and our government. Let's get some details from the story. Now, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has added his voice to the call for teachers who are on strike to return to the classrooms while negotiations continue on their demand for the payment of cost of living allowance. They call it COLA for short. Addressing the National Eid al-Adha prayers at the Black Star Square in Accra last Saturday, the president asked the teachers to take into consideration the education of students, especially those preparing to write or sit their final examination, and call off the strike so that their education would not be negatively affected. In his words, quoting him, "My fellow Ghanaians, we are all going to have to make some sacrifices to afford us the space to navigate the troubled waters of the current economic difficulties. Discretionary expenditures of ministries and agencies have been cut by 30%. The salaries of all political appointees, including myself, have been reduced by 30%. Fuel allocation has been slashed by 50%, the president said. And all of these weave into what the teachers have been, calling for, cost of living allowance. And as most economists say, rightly so, Suleimana, because guess what? These fluctuations in terms of inflation, in terms of the currency shortfalls or depreciation and all of that have really affected the standard of living. Today we'll be discussing the PSWU and how it feels on the back of government saying that, look, we'll start negotiations, yes, but the reality is that you know what time it is, and we all have to tighten our belts. Mr. President saying here, we are tightening our belt as well. Your reaction?
Well, first, Ben, I should say that I am a professional teacher. I did a professional teacher training, taught professionally for 4 years before getting into the field of journalism. So I'm always passionate about the field of teaching. And I know that teachers are perhaps one of the worst remunerated category of workers in our country. And so I really, really sympathize with them. And I know that they are going through quite a lot. Now, I also do appreciate the comments made by the president in terms of the times that we are in. And therefore, every individual, every citizen needing to sacrifice under the circumstances. However, I hold a view that the attitude of this government, the attitude of the president over the period, hasn't demonstrated that sacrifice that he wants all of us to make.
He's talking about discretionary expenditures of ministries and agencies which have been cut by 30%. He's talking about fuel, dispensing, which has been cut by 50% and all of that. And he's not been left out himself. He's been hit by the 30% reduction.
Look, Ben, I have always said that when it comes to this whole conversation about the president saying that my salary has been cut and so on and so forth, for some of us, it appears that it is a statement to make us feel as if we don't know how this country is run, as if we are people who don't really have discerning minds and so on. I mean, why would the president be talking about his salary? Which president in our republic has really depended on their salary? If the president wants, he should tell all ministers that from now on, ministers are not going to be paid a monthly salary. And let's see which minister will resign. Which minister is there because of their salary? We all know the deals they make. We all know the inflated contracts they have. I mean, how many ministers or how many government appointees are using their salaries to build all the buildings they are putting around us and all the kinds of things that they have around? Like I've said, the president can say that they've cut their salaries by 99%. And let's find out if any minister will resign because now they have a bad job. No one will resign. In fact, I'm sure that even if it turns out that, look, every month, every minister has to contribute a certain amount of money with that salary, they will still hold on to their positions. So if the president talk about my salary has been reduced by 30%, sometimes it makes it feel as if he thinks we don't have, we don't have discerning minds.
Suleimana, do you find that insensitive? Because some have also said, look, and they draw the exact conclusion that you are drawing. They say, look at what you as Article 71 holders get, and look at what we, over the last few years, public sector workers, what are the increments? 4%, 7%. What are the increments that Article 71 office holders have been getting? And again, what is the quantum of salary? You get it. So a lot are crying out that when you say we should tighten our belts, it looks like a monkey tightening its belt versus a whale trying to tighten its belt. There are disparities.
Ben, the reality is that he talks about fuel allocation to ministers and other appointees have been reduced by 50%. Does the teacher have any fuel allocation? So why allocate fuel under these current circumstances to people who are earning far more than a teacher is earning or a nurse is earning? So if you talk about a 50% reduction of fuel allocation, how much were they getting in the first place? So if a minister was getting the equivalent of about 4,000 or 3,000 Ghana cedis as fuel every month, and you say you've reduced it by 50%, that is 1,500 allocation. That is the salary of a teacher. That is the salary of some teachers and some nurses and so on. Then you talk about discretionary expenditure having been reduced by 30%. What it means is that they still have some money that they can play with. We're talking about discretionary expenditure. If the president wants us to take him serious on this issue of mitigation measures, we can run this country by not more than 40 to 50 ministers. That is what we want to see. President Ouattara reduced his cabinet to 30 ministers because he thought the economy required saving.
I think I've seen one of our independent, presidential aspirants in the past say that he would require just about 20 ministers. And, sometimes it boggles even my mind. It gets me thinking because in more developed jurisdictions, you go to the UK and others, look at the number of secretaries you have in the United States. It's a freaking continent, for crying out loud. It's a continent on its own. Look at the number of secretaries you have. Look at in the UK, the number you have there. But then the counter argument would be that they have proper systems. Their systems have evolved to the point where, work flows, work flourishes, and you can have a few people at the helm of affairs doing the work. But what would it take for us to get there? Because it doesn't appear, someone else could come and give us 200 ministers and would have nothing to say about that. That is why some people also point to the Constitution and say, you know what, in other jurisdictions, maybe there are caps here and there. Maybe we should start, capping off some of these, because if you leave politicians to do whatever they will, this is what happens.
Exactly. Those measures will require legislative processes, maybe constitutional review, and so on and so forth. But
oh, blimey. We appear to have lost the connection there. We'll try to reconnect with Suleimana Brahima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. But some interesting thoughts he was sharing there. Suleimana, I think we have you back.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So the point I was making is that we have a situation where close to 100, if not more, ministers are serving. We have a situation where the presidency alone, constantly we are being reminded and being told about how much is allocated to the presidency and how much presidential staffers have been appointed on Article 71 conditions and so on and so forth. Why is the president not talking about those things as areas to cut in terms of the measures? The president still has a minister who has been living outside this country in the United States for over a year now. And the person remains a minister, and so long as she remains a minister, it is right to think that the person will be paid her salary. Why is the president not dealing with matters like that? So I really don't think that the president is really serious about the measures that he talks about and the demands that he is making on other people to sacrifice. I don't think that I've seen any sacrifice, any measures that indicates a clear and serious sacrifice on the part of the government and on the part of the president.
All right. Let me look at two more angles of this entire script briefly so we can proceed from there. I'm focusing a bit on it because of the relevance of it, the weight the story carries. Now, the story also captures that the current economic challenges, he added, and he here would be Mr. President, were on a global scale, which had affected many countries, but he gave the assurance that the government was leaving no stone unturned in resolving the challenges. We've been inundated with talk about, oh, we're hit by COVID and we're hit by the Russo-Ukrainian war. We also know that for every time we've gone to the IMF, for example, there has been some crisis of sorts. But let's even let that slide. We're also looking at the fact that the Russo-Ukrainian war has been blamed to a large extent. We see the impact across the world, but I always say, to what extent? There are different countries feeling different pressures. Recently, Sri Lanka capitulated. It succumbed. The president had to, flee the country. In our instance, we have seen the Russians right here in Ghana come and say, look, don't blame what you're facing in terms of your economy on us. We have nothing to do with it. But we also keep saying, this is the situation. What is your reflection on that? To what extent does Suleiman Abrahima feel the Russo-Ukrainian war has affected anything? And secondly, you talk about the piss poor conditions of service of teachers. The caption of the story is "Restore Services, President Appeals to Teachers." Right call in terms of saying, go back and do what you're supposed to do. Students are suffering. Some are going to sit exams and all of that. They would suffer if you don't go back to the classroom. Two issues, as quickly as you can address them.
Well, first of all, Russia, Ukraine, and the global crisis, it's something that one cannot wish away at all. Indeed, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had some global effect on economies, on food prices, on fuel prices, and so on. And I don't think that we are an island to those effects. I'm sure we've also been hit to some extent. Beyond that, there is also the global crisis emanating from COVID and others. So even in the US, the UK, the advanced societies, inflation is going up, prices of fuel have gone up, and all of that. So certainly there has been some impact on us from those effects. However, it's about how we have managed our own affairs. If you look at COVID, for example, which we blame for some of the crises or some of the issues that we have, yes, industry to a large extent, a lot of them were shut down, hotels were not operating, the tourist sector shut down and all of that. But we also had significant amounts of money from the crisis. IMF alone, the last time I was listening to your colleague about Spencer do an analysis that pointed to the fact that during the period, IMF alone gave us about $2.4 billion dollars. The World Bank has indicated, we had hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of the pandemic. How did we manage that? We messed up, and we saw it as an opportunity to amass wealth, to dissipate resources, and to embezzle funds through funny schemes like, say, providing hot meals to the poor, awarding fishy contracts for fumigation when we knew that fumigation cannot do anything in the context of COVID, because other countries then would not have been suffering. Italy, Spain, people were dying in thousands. If fumigation was what they needed to do, they would have been in a better position to do that than us. But we saw it as an opportunity to embezzle funds through fishy contracts and all of that. And so, yes, we can talk about the global crisis, but we had our opportunity out of the crisis and we messed it up. The president calling on teachers to go back, yes, I think that we cannot say schools should be shut down as a result of the demands on the part of the teachers, which is legitimate. But I'm sure that if the president is making that call, we should also see him act in a way that demonstrates why the teachers must go back to their classrooms. If, as I said, we see the president announce tomorrow that as a result of the crisis, I have cut down the number of ministries to 50. I have reduced presidential staffers. to 40% or 50% what it was. I have, decided henceforth all ministers, if you are moving within Accra and its enclave, V8s must be parked because government is no longer going to be able to subsidize the cost of fuel. People would then see that, yes, we are in crisis and the government or the head of family or the father is taking measures that, require sacrifices on the part of all of us.
Right.
And if the president continues to keep this balloon administration with all the unnecessary expenditures and calling on the poor teacher to go back to the classroom, I don't think that it is justified and it is legitimate.
Right. When you look at the middle spread, center spread of the Daily Graphic newspaper, the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission is set to meet organized labor tomorrow. And this would involve 23 labor unions and associations in respect of their demands. But let me wrap on the international front with the Daily Graphic and then move on to the Ghanaian Times newspaper. Biden defends Saudi visit, and the American president has defended his upcoming visit to Saudi Arabia amid criticism the trip represents a backslide in his administration's commitment to human rights. Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia is part of a wider Middle Eastern tour from July the 13th to the 16th. That includes stops in Israel and the occupied West Bank. But of course, he's caught some flack on the back of that decision. His critics saying it's a backslide as far as that visit is concerned. Elon Musk to terminate $44 billion Twitter deal in a shocking pirouette. He's already put pen to paper, though, so only the courts now will determine what exactly the way forward is. Maybe, finally, Elon has bitten more than he can chew. There's Russian rockets hit Ukraine apartment block, and at least 15 people were killed and 24 more feared trapped after Russian Uragan rockets hit a 5-story apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. But finally, the story that I really want you to focus on, Suleimana. Sri Lankan protesters vow to occupy palace until leaders resign. And protesters have said they will continue to occupy the Sri Lankan presidential and prime ministerial residences until both leaders officially resign. We've seen the president say, you know what, and we've seen footage, interesting footage from the BBC concerning what appears to be the president, sneaking out of the country, his bags and everything. Interestingly, the V8s and all that we've been talking about, they were all left in the presidential palace. They couldn't be taken away. And Gotabaya Rajapaksa had to, flee like a mouse that has seen a cat. I found it really interesting. And if you watch that BBC, just that 4-minute clip or so, at the end, the reporter says something very interesting. Leaders across the world, beware. Your quick reflection on that.
Well, the Sri Lankan situation is quite a sad development. The build-up started way back, and certainly things were not going right. But in countries like that, such as those in Africa, where people come to power to amass wealth and to ensure that their family and friends are sorted out, it is quite difficult for leaders to act consensuously. In other countries where people come to power in order to serve their countries honestly, it doesn't take anything to resign. We've seen Boris Johnson resign, Theresa May resigned, before her, her predecessor resigned, and we see resignations in the West all the time. But in societies, developing societies such as ours, in Sri Lanka and those places, people come to power and it is not about the interest, the true interest of the people, but it's about their own interest and how they can live like queens and kings. And so it's a very sad development, but as was said, it sends a signal to all leaders around the world that you cannot take people for granted forever. At some point, the people will demonstrate that indeed the power belongs to them. And at that point, when they decide to act, there's little that can be done. There is little that the military, the police, the security around the leadership can do, because Once the systems break down, everything breaks down. And so, yes, leaders have to be aware of how they lead, because in the end, when the people decide to rise up, there's nothing that can stop them. We just have to all appeal to our brothers and sisters in Sri Lanka that at the end of the day, when the storm settles, there will be a country to build. And so in terms of destroying properties and so on and so forth, they should be aware that in the end, it's not a war. It's not like Russia invading Ukraine and destroying the country. It is their own country. And when leadership is restored and the storm settles, there will be a country to build. And that's how they must act and think about the current situation.
All right. Let's get into the Ghanaian Times newspaper. I'll have us focus on two stories, but the broader stories in the paper. At Eid al-Adha prayers, go back to classrooms, President appeals to striking teacher unions. There's also President Akufo-Addo Mahama consoled Japan over assassination of Shinzo Abe. We all know former longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan. And it's even more curious because these killings, in fact, gun violence in Japan is almost non-existent. Almost non-existent. In the year 2014, they had how many? About 6 incidents, while juxtaposed with the United States, which had over 33,000. So you see the difference. And it has taken Japanese society by quite the scruff of the neck, really. Very shocking incident there. And the reasons given by the assassin, his mother had been affected by some group to which the former prime minister belonged and all of that. We commiserate with the people of Japan. A gentle person, really, Shinzo Abe. But be vigilant, report suspicious characters to security agents, national security telling us that. The two stories I want us to focus on, Suleimana. Food shortage hits Upper West Region SHS, S's if you like. Chas threatens to close down schools. It's a matter we're going to be delving into. That is on page 17 of the newspaper. And the Conference of Heads of Assisted Schools in the Upper West region says it will be compelled to close down senior high schools in the region by July 15 if sufficient money is not received to cater for the feeding and other needs of the students. In a statement released by the conference after a meeting at the Queen of Peace Senior High School on July the 6th, the CHAS stated that there was serious food shortage in the various senior high schools due to a break in supply of commodities to the schools by suppliers. It said the decision was reached because the schools could no longer feed the school children as there was no food, and said upon interaction with the food suppliers contracted by the buffer stock, it was revealed that they were refusing to perform their end of the bargain due to non-payment of outstanding money owed for supplies delivered earlier. So that is one of the issues, and it's become dicey for these students. I mean, I've seen interactions where they have stopped the students from engaging in certain activities like PE and all of that, because you don't go and do these things on an empty stomach, basically. I've seen some of these. The other issue I want you to just fuse to it and react for me so that we can wrap is this international story. Kagame to seek fourth term as Rwandan president, and Rwanda's leader, who has been in power for 2 decades, has said he would consider remaining in office for another 20 years. Paul Kagame told a French TV channel he would stand for president again at the next election in 2024. Mind you, in 2015, he changed the constitution, allowing him to stay until 2034. In the last presidential election 5 years ago, official figures showed he won 99% of the vote, which many outside the country dismissed as a sham. But what has been Paul Kagame's reaction? He is 64. He says, I would consider running for another 20 years. I have no problem with that. Elections are about people choosing. On that one, when you react to it, Suleimana, I want you to look at this. I am of the opinion that if Nkrumah had more time, maybe Ghana would have got better. Some say Nkrumah was a bit of a despot. We have the example of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. Look at them. Within 3 decades, look at what he did to that country. But then again, we have democratic principles. And, there's the entire mix, and sometimes it becomes very convoluted. What do we do? Do we allow one person to go? If the person is good, should we just let them go? I mean, what is it? That is the situation in which Rwanda sort of finds itself. And we all acknowledge there are some very good things happening in Rwanda. So 2 stories for your quick reflection, and it's a wrap.
Well, first of all, the developments in Upper West region is again one of the issues that reveal the poverty of our state and the poverty of governance that we find ourselves in. Because you would say that if you look at what the kinds of things that we are able to do, the kinds of services that we are able to provide to leadership, and you look at basic things as food for school kids, and we not being able to meet that kind of service is quite baffling, as a country. But of course, teachers cannot decide that by themselves they would use their farm produce to feed their kids. That's if they have. And the teachers, I'm sure, in the various secondary schools, even if they decide that they were putting their salaries together every month, I doubt that their salaries put together in one school can feed kids for 2 days or 3 days. So certainly the government has a responsibility, and one wonders why suppliers of food to schools are not being paid. Again, it comes down to all the arrangements that are made. Maybe something that would cost a school some 100,000 cedis is being given out there to contractors at 300,000 or 400,000 so that somebody will get a kickback and all of that. So it comes down to the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. Very unfortunate, but the teachers have little to do. I mean, they are there to teach and to administer the school, not to provide food to the kids. So if that is what it has gotten to, well, it's unfortunate, but what can they do? They may then have to close down the school unless the right things are done in terms of paying the contractors or the suppliers so that food is delivered. And I hope that the government would take steps to ensure that the schools in Upper West are not closed. And given that this is coming from Upper West, I wouldn't be surprised that the situation may not be different from Upper East, from Savannah, from Northern region, from Northeast, and maybe other parts of the country. So it's a critical matter that the government needs to pay attention to. On Kagame, yes, we've all been talking about Rwanda and the development model that they've had there. I think that it comes down to what a group of people in a country decide to choose. If the change of the constitution was done in such a way that it allowed people to express themselves, and the people thought that, well, this is the person we want because he's done quite a lot, what can we do? The other thing is if it was done in a very brutish way, such that it was just something being pushed down the throat, that was pushed down the throat of citizens, then that is really unfortunate, because that's where the human rights issues come up. But again, as I said, it comes down to what a group of people have chosen. Angela Merkel just stepped down last year or the year before, and he had been in power for, I suppose, about 16 years. And she was hailed as one of the icons when it comes to leadership, not just in terms of Germany, but also providing leadership globally. And so if the people of Rwanda decide that, look, we wouldn't mind, we would not have term limits, as long as the person in power delivers and serves our interests and provides our needs, well, so be it. But if it's also being done in such a way that, well, the president has the military, the police, and abusing opposition parties, opposition leaders, and I think there was a lady who wanted to contest or so, she was arrested, maltreated and thrown into jail. I don't think that then is leadership. I think that is autocracy. Right. And that should be allowed to prevail. And the AU has some role to play in here. What do we want as a continent? Do we want one leader to be there forever? Because leadership is also about grooming successors. So if you are a leader, then you shouldn't be afraid when you leave, because you would have groomed somebody or identified somebody and built their capacity, and be confident that when you leave, the person will continue to deliver the good things that you have in mind. But if you haven't done that, then certainly that also takes away a bit of your leadership qualities. And so the AU would have to step in to ensure that the right things are done, so that it wouldn't provide an example for other countries to also say, hey, if Kagame has done it, then I would also do it. And before you realize, we are back into the turmoil of leadership or people in leadership not wanting to leave, such as what we've witnessed in Cote d'Ivoire, in Guinea, leading to the coup d'etat in Guinea, and so on and so forth.
Another beautiful session with you, Suleiman Ibrahima, and we're most grateful that you've taken time off on this holiday. You should be resting, but we've drawn you out. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Week.
All right. Suleiman Ibrahima, Executive Director for the Media Foundation for West Africa, joining us. The rest of the conversation continues when we get into our big stories. We're going to be talking about those secondary schools in the Upper West region that have, issues when it comes to the shortage of food. We're going to be talking about the labor unions as well and their entire situation when it comes to the cost of living allowance. But up next, we'll serve you sports. Do stay.